how has your DNA, which is 1 in 1 billion, ended up on her top?
A father of 6 with a secret, violent past.
Clearly a very disturbed man, capable of high levels of violence, sexual violence.
The crime that led to one of the worst miscarriages of justice of our time.
I am not a liar. I am not in denial.
And a battle for truth that's still continuing.
What this wrongful conviction has done is wrecked Andy's life, denied the victim justice, it's jeopardised public safety. This dangerous man was allowed to roam free.
This is a story that begins and ends in Little Hulton in Salford.
It's the early hours of a July morning in 2003, and a young woman is walking alone along this road after a blazing row with her boyfriend. It's 5 miles to her home and it's going to take her 2 hours. But what she doesn't know is somewhere along this road, a sex predator is lying in wait.
It was a long and lonely walk. At one point she tried to get a taxi, but she couldn't find one and had no choice but to continue on foot.
And this is where she started to feel unsafe. She heard a rustling and heard a man's voice with a local Bolton accent shout, "Come into the bushes, I have a gun pointed at your head." And so, unnerved, she sent a text of what had happened and crossed the road to head to the shops and houses. Over the next 15 minutes or so, the woman realised that there was a man behind her. Every time she looked back, she could see he was still some distance away, but closing the gap. His shirt was open, so she increased her pace, walking this way towards the motorway and closer to home. This was the point where she was attacked. She looked behind her and the man had caught up with her and he grabbed her from behind and forced her down the bank here.
I started to panic. I couldn't breathe. I was flailing my arms about, panicking. I thought by this time the man was trying to kill me. I said, I know who you are. I've seen your face. I reached up and dug my nail in his face from ear to jaw downwards. The man came down again. I said, please don't. I've got 2 babies. Don't hurt me. That comment seemed to annoy him even more. He appeared to gain extra strength this time, 20 times harder than before. I was convinced he was going to kill me.
He strangled her until unconscious and raped her twice.
This was the scene in 2003. A massive police investigation found no usable forensic evidence. All detectives had to go on with descriptions of the suspect from the victim and 2 supposed eyewitnesses. And for 20 years, police, prosecutors and the courts concluded it was this man, Andy Malkinson. Speaking to me in 2023, he recalled the moment he was accused.
They said, we're arresting you for attempted murder and rape. And then I thought, oh my God, they can't think I've done that, surely. You know, what makes them think I've done that?
But he was in fact innocent. There was nothing to link him to the scene or to the victim. He wasn't local, he didn't have any local knowledge. And most importantly, he didn't have a scratch on his face that the victim had inflicted as she fought for her life. It was in fact this man, Paul Quinn. He had all the local knowledge, he had the right accent, and he had a sexual offences conviction. But most of all, his DNA was left on the victim's clothing.
James Burley is an investigator with Appeal, the miscarriages of justice charity that took on Andy Malkinson's case. Just 3 years after his 2004 trial, a forensic science project reviewing DNA samples revealed a hidden truth.
In 2007, there was a nationwide police retesting initiative called Operation Cube, and what that discovered in Andy's case was that there was an unknown male DNA profile on the victim's vest top, and this didn't match Andy, and it was from an area which even the prosecution were describing back then as crime specific, and that was because it was in an area that had tested positive for potential saliva staining, and it was right on top of where she'd suffered an injury that was consistent with a bite mark on her breast. And really that should have been the point where it was crystal clear that there'd been a miscarriage of justice here.
The Criminal Cases Review Commission, the body that investigates miscarriages of justice, twice rejected Andy Malkinson's pleas for help, despite knowing about the discovery. It wasn't until 2022 that the profile was linked to Paul Quinn. And that was only thanks to lobbying from Appeal. James Burley's work with scientists was increasingly finding evidence that was pointing to another man.
When we had these results back, we still didn't know who that unknown male was. And so the next step was then going to the Criminal Cases Review Commission and saying, okay, you rejected this case previously, but come on now, we've got this guy's DNA in that highly significant area, but also potentially his DNA in various other locations as well. Once it was presented with that evidence from us, finally agreed to do some further work, and they essentially arranged the search of the National DNA database in 2022, which led to the identification of Paul Quinn.
During Paul Quinn's Manchester Crown Court trial, the jury heard that the chances that the DNA from the vest wasn't his were 1 in a billion. Crucially, prosecutors said another DNA find from a medical instrument used to examine the victim supported their case that he was guilty of rape. When he spoke in his own defence, Quinn accepted the vest DNA was his, but he disputed other finds. So what was his explanation?
How has your DNA, which is 1 in 1 billion, ended up on her top?
Don't know. I really don't know. Because I did not do this offence. There's got to be some explanation I can't think of.
When he was arrested and interviewed by police in 2022, Paul Quinn had an explanation. He told detectives he was a serial philanderer.
I weren't loyal.
Pardon?
I weren't loyal.
Okay.
We did go out partying. We did have a lot of female friends. We never seemed to have a night out where we didn't end up at an house party or we'd cop off with girls. Even during my work, when I'd be working, I admit I've cheated on my wife hundreds of times with girls that we've met on nights out.
You've tried to explain away the DNA by making out as if you slept with the majority of Manchester over a 16-year period.
Okay.
And on the off chance that you can say that your DNA has been left inside a victim because you may have had sex with her at some time. Okay.
Yeah, but
What
I've not
you-
said I've not had sex with them all. There's been contact.
Okay.
Quinn and the victim didn't know each other, and there was no suggestion in court that she shared his casual sex lifestyle. She said that her attacker had worn an unbuttoned white shirt with a stripe. Paul Quinn's ex-wife told the trial that she remembered he'd had a shirt like that, and he'd come home in 2003, on the night of the attack, having lost it. She remembered joking with him that it better not be found near the crime scene, which was in the news. Crucially, she said he used to wear it unbuttoned, and that every summer he would shave his chest to deal with the heat. 2 elements which matched the description given by the victim. Finally, there was Quinn's internet searching. In 2019, he was looking at reports of Andy Malkinson's conviction long after it had been forgotten. He then Googled wrongly convicted cases UK. Why would he do that? Asked prosecutors. When news later broke of the forensic lead that could clear an innocent man, Quinn was back on the internet. How long is DNA kept in the database? He searched. And later, why do I keep sweating all the time? Paul Quinn knew the police had his DNA because he was a sex offender. In 1991, he was convicted of unlawful sexual intercourse with a 12-year-old girl. He'd been 16 at the time. In 2012, the police came to see him to take his DNA to add to the national database of offenders. It hadn't been taken at the time of the offence because it wasn't operational back then. Quinn also has convictions for arson and violence. What type of man is Paul Quinn?
Clearly a very disturbing or disturbed man, capable of high levels of violence, sexual violence, really a dangerous individual. And then to sit back when somebody else goes to prison, I think says everything anyone needs to know about the type of man that he is. He gave that rather strange account of his promiscuity. We believe that had been thought about in advance, that he knew we were coming to arrest him,
Do you think it's possible there are other victims out there?
As it stands right now, we do not have any definitive links with Quinn and other offences, but it is something that we are continuing to investigate. And absolutely, if there is anybody that has any information to provide to us about Quinn and his offending history, then I would urge them to get in contact with us, please. There's only 2 men at that time who knew absolutely that this was a miscarriage of justice. One of them was Andrew Malkinson, and one of them was the attacker, and that's Paul Quinn.
Greater Manchester Police are liars, and they are in denial.
I was there at the Court of Appeal when he came out a free, innocent man, and he described Greater Manchester Police as liars. How does that make you feel as an officer of this force today?
Uncomfortable. My job now, from October 2022, is to make sure that this investigation is conducted with absolute integrity, that we follow up every single reasonable line of inquiry, that we make sure that we have done a really thorough investigation, and we do that not only for the victim, we do that for Andrew Malkinson, because it is essential that we get this right for both of them. And this is a unique investigation in terms of not only our professional investment, but personal investment, because the magnitude of this, the magnitude of the impact that this has had on somebody's life, not only the victim but Andrew Malkinson, we realise, and we've all been absolutely invested in making sure that we get this right. That's what we can do, that's within our control.
Important breaking news here, because Paul Quinn has been found guilty by a jury at Manchester Crown Court of a rape attack in 2003.
To the victim of this heinous crime, and to Andrew Malkinson, the victim of this profound miscarriage of justice, I apologise sincerely.
I read this statement on behalf of the victim. I am very pleased with the verdict today. It does not change the fact that 2 lives have been impacted in such a way, however, justice has been served.
What this wrongful conviction has done, you know, it's wrecked Andy's life, but it's also denied the victim justice, it's jeopardised public safety. And because the police didn't do their job, because the CCRC didn't do this job, this dangerous man was allowed to roam free for all those years. And I mean, that's just like, you know, sickening.
During Paul Quinn's trial, the victim told the jury that she hadn't been sure that Andy Malkinson was her attacker after she saw him in court in 2004. Now, she confided in a police officer at the time. She couldn't remember his name, but she called him the Don because he looked a bit Italian to her.
The fact that Andrew was imprisoned for 17 years for a crime he didn't commit is clearly a failing of Greater Manchester Police and the wider criminal justice system. And for that, we are absolutely sorry. I cannot imagine the impact that that has had on him and his family. And for that, we are profoundly sorry. We are determined that this cannot happen again. And we also offer our apologies to the victim who we've let down. There is a difference between corruption and human error. We really need to understand how those errors occurred and why those errors occurred. And only at that point will we be able to understand whether there is blame for the police, for anybody else.
A judge-led inquiry is now looking into the actions of police and prosecutors. The Independent Office for Police Conduct, the watchdog, is investigating 5 GMP officers who are retired, one of whom is back in the force as a civilian, and 1 serving officer. Paul Quinn is now in prison, and it's now down to those inquiries to work out why he was free for so long, while the wrong man, Andy Malkinson, was locked up in jail.